Now, it is my pleasure to introduce our next conversation, creating gender-affirming spaces. Lex is a queer, non-binary, transgender, Jewish, nationally recognized LGBTQ educator, activist, consultant, public speaker, and model based out of Philadelphia and New York City. Lex received their BA in psychology and gender, sexuality, and women's studies. And while at university, they competed on the varsity's men's squash team and became the first out transgender athlete in all of collegiate squash and the first out transgender athlete to compete at their university. Their work focuses on educating people of all ages and backgrounds on LGBTQ identities, topics, and issues through a multitude of pathways, facilitations and workshops, for example, lectures and public speaking, one-on-one support, and consultation services, to name a few. So, joining Lex in conversation, we have Hunter Canning, a New York-based actor, puppeteer, producer, and photographer with a passion for bringing people together to foster growth, kindness, and a true understanding of each other. I'll let you all take it away. And it looks that Hunter might be having some technical difficulties. So actually, Lex, as we're onboarding Hunter, I would love to pass the mic to you. This is such a beautiful introduction that I've read, and I've had the pleasure of introducing you before on summits. Is there anything else you'd like to share with us to help set the stage for today's conversation?
Sure, absolutely. Also, thank you so much for the intro, and thank you everyone for being here. It is truly just such an honor and a privilege to be able to be in community spaces, to engage in conversation, and through all of the work that I do, the common thread that connects it all is in providing a space that is judgment-free, where people can be comfortable with being uncomfortable, because it's through that learning process that we can grow and evolve into not only better versions of ourselves, but also to really cultivate the community and cherishing the identities that have so often been marginalized or pushed to the sides. So it is just an unbelievable privilege to be here today and to get to talk about the importance of language, how we use language to create these authentic and affirming spaces, talk about what allyship truly looks like in practice. There are so many pieces that go into the daily work of supporting the queer and trans community. And I come into this space carrying all of my identities as a queer, non-binary, trans Jewish human. I also use the understanding of gender of being gender transcendent, transcending binaries and the restraints to simply exist as the person that I am. And so these are all of the different pieces that I bring into space as an educator. And I'm so grateful to be sharing all of this with you.
Yes, so grateful to have you here. And I'm just going to pick up the mic because it looks like we are missing Hunter. And I know he was really excited to speak with you, but I get the pleasure right now to ask you some questions. And so just first of all, thank you for being a voice in this space. We need you. I mean, it's so beautiful to hear your lived experience, and also that you are using your platform as an educator in particular to help educate us, because we need a lot of that clearly. And just thank you from the jump there. So let's set the stage by first talking about gender more broadly, because I know we might have some folks listening who, want to be better allies, who want to also, dive deeper into their personal experience. And so let's start with some basics here. So what is gender? And how is it different from sexual orientation?
Very important difference, and such a incredible jumping off point, because not only do we have gender, which people commonly think is very simple, it's very complex, and the complexities are what makes it absolutely beautiful. So gender, when we think about gender, we're actually looking at three different component identities that are different from each other. They come together to create the beautiful diversity of existence. However, they are different. So when we think of gender, we're actually looking at gender identity, which is separate from gender expression, which is separate from sex. And someone's sex can then be further understood as someone's sex assigned at birth or designated at birth, and then also someone's current sex. And that may or may not be the same. So gender identity is our internal concept of self. It's who we know ourselves to be in a gendered sense. Because it's internal, only you know what your gender identity is. No one can tell you what your gender is. The terms we use when we talk about gender are gender fluid, non-binary, woman, man, two-spirit, agender, so many other terms. So when we talk about gender and gender identity, those are the terms we want to use. When we talk about gender expression, how we choose to externally present ourselves to the world, whether it's our haircut, our clothing, our mannerisms, our behaviors. The terms that we use for talking about gender expression are feminine, masculine, and androgynous. And when we talk about sex, sex when people typically think of it, it's, oh, well, at birth, infants are assigned a sex based off of their external anatomy. However, sex is much more complicated. It is a combination of bodily characteristics that include hormones, internal, external reproductive organs, secondary sex characteristics, and chromosomes, amongst other physical characteristics. And so when we look at sex, the terms we use are female, male, non-binary, and intersex. And intersex, for folks that do not know, is an umbrella term that encompasses folks who have a sex that does not fit neatly into the binary categories of male and female bodies. They are natural bodily variations. And intersex is not one sex, it's that umbrella term that encompasses folks that fall along that spectrum. And so when we talk about gender and engage in conversation, it's so important that we build this foundation of understanding gender in the different pieces, that we use the language appropriately when talking about gender identity, which is not the same thing as sex, or when talking about someone's gender presentation, which is also not the same thing as someone's gender identity or their sex. And so it's through this conflation of, when we talk about gender, we're being asked to use sex terms on forms, on surveys, in conversation. When we are out in the streets and we are looking at people and we're making assumptions about who we think they are based off of their external appearance, all we are seeing is their gender expression in that one given moment. And we know nothing about their gender identity, since that's their internal sense of self. We know very, very limited assumptions about their sex, potentially based off of secondary sex characteristics. So we can see the ways in which these are different identities. They have different definitions, they have different terms. And in order to create affirming, safe, and validating spaces, we must come from the foundation of this language to engage in the conversation, to be able to uplift and affirm people. And so that is the quick nitty-gritty on gender.
Yes, I'm throwing all the digital confetti. Do you have a book out? Are you planning on writing a book? Like, where can we get your resources? Because I feel like you just have so much to say and it's on point. I need to just like share it to people so they can pick up this language and use it as a tool to help move people forward. And I see that Hunter is here now, and I know that he's been excited to chat with you. So I'm going to let Hunter pick it up from here. And thank you, Lex, for all the work that you do.
Maybe a book is next. I absolutely love that. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely write a book. I would absolutely love that. I love the bow tie, by the way. Hello, Lex.
Hello.
As we're talking about things moving and shifting, and we know that things can be fluid, and right now you just had some fluidity with your hosts and your moderators as well. So thank you for your flexibility and hanging in there with me. So I got to hear a little bit of where we were, and so if you could jump in, we were. I think you were giving us a bit about, what is gender, sort of, which is a wild question to ask someone. Just like, excuse me, sir, ma'am, anything in between, anything else? What is gender? That's huge. So thank you for some of those terms. And I feel like a lot of people can get really like, I don't want to say the wrong thing, like allies that I talk to, and some like myself too. I'm just like, okay, I need to be bring some humility to the conversation, me, Hunter, because I need to check in with people to be like, hey, preferred pronouns or anything you want to let me know. And if I mess up, right, like I need to just like accept it, take the note and move on, right? What would you say are like good tips for people too? Like, as just like, I just want to like allies or whoever, just like, how do I communicate in the healthiest way possible?
Yes. Okay. Such amazing questions. Also, before I lose the many trains of thought that I have, I do want to say, because I know that I talked about gender, but I didn't address the what is sexual orientation / sexuality.
Oh, okay, great. Yeah,
So
let's jump into that
definitely want to touch on that, because another thing, in addition to folks using sex and gender interchangeably, although they are different identities, a lot of times folks are also think that when we talk about sex, it's the same thing as sexuality. So sexuality or sexual orientation is someone's inherent, immutable, enduring connection to other people, whether that is romantic, emotional, or physical. And when we're talking about sexuality, there's this myth that there has to be action, there has to be experience in order to know your sexuality, which is simply not true, because sexuality is solely based off of self-identification and who you're attracted to. And so when we're talking about sexuality, it is the same for folks who are queer, for folks who are straight. It is simply who you are attracted to. No action needed. It's self-identification that is sexuality. And so when we look at gender, when we look at sexuality, every single person has a gender and every single person has a sexuality. That may be that they do not have a gender. They may be agender. That may be that they do not have a physical or romantic attraction to other people, that they are asexual or aromantic. And still, every single person will exist within separate realms of gender and sexuality. That was a very, very basic. There's so much more that goes into sexuality, just relationship structures.
Yeah.
Like the different levels of attraction, the ways in which gender come into play. But point being is that when we're talking about how we support folks in the queer community, we're looking at supporting folks who are queer in sexuality and folks who are queer in their gender, and both. So I'm someone who would be queer in both of those spaces. And so when we're creating these spaces, a lot of the tools and tactics and responsibilities of our allies will fall within the same realms, with visibility, with advocacy, with using our language. And there will still be these nuances and intricacies when we're talking about gender, when we're talking about sexuality, because they are two different identities.
So if we're talking about, so there's gender and then there's sexuality. And I feel like now we're starting to like, okay, let's paint this box. Let's paint this portrait over here, and we'll paint this mural over here. So with creating like, you know, LGBTQIA plus spaces and DE&I efforts that you're so like involved in, right? Can you help like teach us, like we hear a lot and we talk a lot about buzzword inclusion, right? So we hear this word a lot, but what's the difference between like, you know, inclusive spaces that are for like gender inclusive spaces and gender, what's this word, affirming spaces? Like, what are these different things?
Yes. So the way that I conceptualize it as a very visual person, so hopefully this helps folks as well, is that when we're talking about inclusive spaces, it has the potential to be the starting point, the jumping off point for being an affirming space. But simply being inclusive is not enough within itself. So what that may look like is if there is an inclusive space, that may have to do with the language that is used to expand beyond binaries to be not gendered. However, that may, in that use of language and in practice, be inclusive. What it looks like to have an affirming space is that individuals not only are included, so inclusion being more of a tolerance, more of an acceptability, whereas an affirming space is a space where a queer and trans person can thrive because they see themselves represented, they are seen, they are not concerned about being welcomed or included. So affirming spaces are empowering spaces. Inclusive spaces may or may not have the potential to be empowering if they are lacking in the ability to be truly an ally to queer and trans people in the actions that happen in those spaces. So it has to do with both attention to cultivating an environment, the intention there, the accountability, the consistency in supporting queer and trans folks. And so on that note, when we're talking about allyship, there's two very important pieces that I love to have folks think about. And in everything that we're talking about today, a couple of important things. One, thinking critically. I would love for everyone to use this space and all the time thereafter to start to think critically and question our given or current understanding of gender, of sex, of sexuality beyond the binaries that we're told that they live in. As we already saw, gender and sexuality are much more than binaries. Because once we start to do that, in our minds, we're already creating inclusive spaces. So if we're thinking critically, if we're questioning, if we are curious, my favorite thing is to have everyone be curious and to be committed to being life learners and engaging in conversation and hearing stories. When we break down the barriers in our own minds and in our own brains, then the ways that we are engaging with other people are going to inherently create these inclusive spaces. And then in engaging in that conversation, engaging in the active work of cultivating these spaces with other people, that's what makes a space affirming. Yes, and then also within the realm of allyship, ally has always and will always be a verb. So allyship requires action. If there is not action, you are not an ally. I'm sure that many folks are familiar with the term like performative allyship, which unfortunately happens oh so very frequently during Pride. If you think of a corporate Pride event versus a back to the roots of our Pride and riots, there's just so many pieces of performativity that don't then show that there's an ally action happening. So when we're looking at our allies, it requires a intention to a consistent support and advocacy for the queer and trans community. And also knowing that if you are queer in your sexuality, that does not inherently make you an ally to trans people. And that's something that so many people don't recognize, because being within the LGBTQ plus community, we have this beautiful umbrella term and this acronym, and we have so many just identities and lived experiences under this beautiful title. And we're still looking at two different identities, gender and sexuality. And so if you are queer in your sexuality, you have work to do similar to cis straight folks to being allies to trans, non-binary, and gender diverse people. Yes, I will stop there because I have so much more to say, but I want to give you the space.
I think it's so important. Thank you so much for this, because I think there is kind of like, well, I'm gay, I get it. And it's like, but maybe there's room to grow, you know? Like, I have my own blind sites, and like, I only have my own lived experience, right? And that's all the experience that I have. So it takes work, like you said, like there is work to do. There are questions to be asked. I think curiosity, like you said, is key, right? You know, it's what helps us help each other within our giant umbrella. Like you said, it's like, you know, it can be very cool under there, but it can also be kind of, you know what umbrellas also cast? Shade. And people can be a little, you know, blindsided, you know?
Yeah.
So what does this look like, you know, in the day-to-day when we're talking about, like, to back up, we're talking about like gender affirming spaces, right? And like, and you were talking about ally, you know, signaling and stuff like that, and businesses and Pride, we all like, there's plenty of examples of it. There's plenty of hilarious memes about it, you know, but like to be a gender affirming business, like actually not just signaling, but what can that look like with different, you know, it's from a big business to a small business, when you have like the communication in the emails or on the floor or on the Zoom call, and, you know, the professional relationships, and for folks that are back in the office, like the physical relationships, you know, and the physical environments. There's so many different wings. There's marketing, there's policy. Like, I think for some companies, there can just be like, well, we threw up the flag this month and we're good, right? But there's a lot more to unpack. So can you give us maybe for the, you know, the business owners, the companies that are out there that maybe already doing it or starting to do it, how can they be an actually affirming, gender affirming space as opposed to a signaling in that environment?
Absolutely. And that's, I always go into, so any of the workshops and the trainings that I do when I work with communities, I start by providing the language foundation, which we did in the beginning, and always end with these tangible takeaways. Because what are we going to do once we have the language? We have to be able to then act and create these spaces. And so I'm going to start by being more general, because all of the ways in which businesses will need to create these affirming and safe spaces are also the same actions that people can be doing to support their queer and trans siblings, family members, community members, people in religious spaces, athletic spaces. They are transferable skills and actions. So it is not limited to workspaces, and still there's such a large impact in being able to do this active work in these workspaces. And so because so much of what we did today and what I do as an educator and a consultant and public speaker is based in language, is because language is the primary filter through which we understand the world around us and engage with others. It is how we truly just understand ourselves and has an impact on then how we are treating other people. And so when we're talking about dignity and respect as the basis, there's no room for negotiation that is what we're doing, and that our mission is to support queer and trans people. And so to do that, language plays a huge role. It's also one of the easiest, simplest, most accessible things that literally any single person every single day can do to create these gender affirming spaces. So for folks that say that they do not have time, for folks who say that they do not have the resources, for folks insert your excuse there. There is no excuse because we all use language in everything that we do. We create language every day. I am the proud parent of my 2 senior special needs fur babies, Sabu and Ladytooth. I hope that they come up at some point.
No, I'm sorry. I have to pause you. What were their names?
Sabu and Ladytooth, LT.
Okay, at the end of this call, because I just got a fur baby as well, but he's a puppy. He's tiny, so maybe we can do a little puppy moment.
Yes. They are truly the loves of my life. Would do anything for them. And I, like, as their parent, I couldn't really find a term that made sense for me. I was like, parent, rent, I've heard guardian, like there are these terms and they technically work, but it's not, I don't feel connected to them. So I came up with the term homo because I call my dad Pops, I call my mom Mojo. And so I created the term homo. And that is my term for being a non-binary parent. And so even in the space where I didn't have the language that connected for me, I created that language. And so in spaces where people say, I don't have the language, I don't know how to do this, try harder. That is a way that we must be holding ourselves accountable when we think that there is no other choice, or we think that our allyship has hit a wall or has plateaued. There is truly no such thing. So much of this has to do with accountability. And it has to do with sticking up for queer and trans people when you either do not think there are queer and trans people present or without being asked. Such an important part of allyship is taking initiative. And importantly, that is not taking away the platform or speaking on behalf or for queer and trans people, but it's using the privilege of being a cis and or straight person to be able to elevate and highlight and provide a path where our voices can be heard when they are so often silenced or erased or eradicated from spaces. And so in workspaces, what that looks like virtually, when we're talking about language, we're in a Zoom right now, have your name and your pronouns. When you are handing out business cards or making new business cards, name, pronouns. Social media, email signature, bring in education. You can hyperlink in your email to mypronouns.org to where your pronouns are. That way you're not only doing language, but you're also doing education. The ways that we are introducing ourselves in meetings, saying my name is Lex, I use they, them pronouns, what's your name and pronouns, virtually and in person. These examples specifically are for name and pronouns to get folks into the habit of asking for name and pronouns. Because although some folks may think that asking for pronouns may be a sign of disrespect, it's actually the opposite. It is a sign of respect, so that you care enough about respecting someone that you want to use their affirming language. Also, just a little note, something that I heard from you earlier that I'm just going to do a little language shift is that our pronouns are not preferred, but they are our pronouns. So some folks say preferred pronouns or personal pronouns. I always just say our pronouns are what they are. There's no room for it to be a preference in the same sense when we're talking about sexuality. That sexuality is not a lifestyle. Some folks may use preference, although a lot of times folks who are anti-LGBTQ use the same language as a tool of hate and as a tactic to take us down as a choice. And so as an educator who has everything based in language, I always like to say, hey, when we're talking about pronouns, they are simply someone's pronouns. When we're talking about name, they may refer to that as their chosen name or their affirming name, but when you ask for a name, that is their real name and no other questions are needed. And so in that visibility in name and pronouns, in asking, in being okay with saying, I forgot this person's name, I forgot this person's pronouns, you can ask, you can use gender neutral language, gender neutral pronouns. It's unbelievably important. Additionally, in those spaces, it is not enough to use pride imagery. However, it is unbelievably important to have pride imagery always. So what that looks like is if you have a laptop, put a sticker on your laptop. If you have a window, hang a flag from your window. If you are walking in the street, you can put a pronoun pin on your bag or your purse. There are so many ways in which we can provide these visual symbols of respect and honor for queer and trans people that seem very basic. However, I know my own personal journey. It took me seeing a safe space sticker. It took me seeing queer people existing in ways that were authentic and did not say that queerness is something to be fearful of. It's this, oh my goodness, are you going to be able to survive? It took seeing the support in visuals and seeing queer people thriving for me to understand my queer and trans identities. And so visibility is such an important piece of that with the language and with having a sign. So like I have just fun posters. I could have posters that say transphobia is not welcome here. I could have a sign that says Black trans lives matter. There are so many ways in which we can use our virtual spaces, our office spaces. If we go to a gym or a religious space, the physical environment that is there, if you see that there are no gender inclusive facilities, whatever that may look like, ask for them. If you ask and they are not responding, demand them. Enlist other allies, because you're not alone in the fight to create these spaces that are safe for folks. And it also should not take the queer and trans people in your life to be harmed by the current existing environment in order to be affirmed. So those are the physical pieces, both virtually and in person. And also unbelievably important in our language is the use of inclusive, non-gendered language. So another piece that, another little language turnaround that I'm gonna bring us into is that when you said like, all right, like you said, like, I don't remember what it was like ma'am, sirs, like everyone in between, right? Like adding that last piece, amazing. And we can also just go into spaces saying, all right, friends, esteemed guests, y'all, welcome. This is the space that we're in, because creating that language and that space, I am my parents' child, I am my sister's sibling, I am my kitty's homo. When we're talking about humankind, we should not say mankind. When we're talking about a chairman, we should just say legislator. Whenever there are binary terms, they always prioritize and uplift men to the detriment of all other genders, which is a whole other story within itself. And when we use inclusive language and non-gendered language, we are including every single person that is in that space, and we are creating the possibility for every individual binary or gender expansive identity to not be restrained by stereotypes. And when we see that happening, when everyone is included and we are able to break out of these binaries and these barriers and all of the things that have directly and indirectly policed our identities from before we're born, with gender reveal parties, which are actually sex reveal parties, which are barely sex reveal parties, whole other thing. But from the before we are born to where we are now, we would see likely cis people who would be more comfortable in a fluidity of whether it's their expression or the language that they use or the behaviors or the mannerisms that they use to navigate the world, because we are not placing individuals into boxes. So using inclusive language not only provides the space for folks of all identities to exist, but also allows every individual, cis, trans, queer, straight, to live in their most authentic and euphoric ways possible.
Yes. Oh my gosh. And we're pretty much out of time now. And I just have to say, like, Lex, thank you so much. And thank you for like offering up, because I am a creature of habit too, right? So like things will just slip out, and like I am so grateful for the opportunity to get to like learn with the master right now, where it's like, oh yeah, like the preferred pronouns, like that is a game changer for me to like take that and remove that, because your pronouns are your pronouns, I heard you say, and I just love that, and that's so helpful for me. And always creating language has power, and like you said, this is for welcoming everyone. And as soon as the language like is put on the pedestal of masculinity, it's always like that's the default that we've heard growing up, and it's up to us to grow and to work and to change and to take the notes and to incorporate them, right? So thank you so much for giving me a masterclass and all of us a masterclass. And congratulations on your fur babies. I hope they continue to thrive with you, as of course they will, because clearly you're the best pomo. Was that the word that we invented? The best pomo. Thank you so much, Lex. Oh, and how do people connect with you? I know you're on Instagram, social, all the things, right?
All those things. And also I wanted to note that when we make mistakes, that is perfectly all right. We apologize, we move forward, we learn, we keep going. It is important to not hold on to mistakes, but to use them as a jumping point for how can I do better? And so as allies, we will all make mistakes. Also, we will all make assumptions. That is evolutionarily how we have survived, but we do not act on those assumptions. So if you make an assumption about someone's identity, it stays in your brain, it does not turn into action. And that is a really important part of allyship as well. to keep our assumptions in check and not acting on them. And so where folks can find me, so my name is Lex. I use they, them pronouns. You can find me on social media at Lex_Horwitz, which is LEX_HORWITZ. You can also learn more about me and my journey and access my free educational resources and events at www.lexhorwitz.com. So LEXHORWITZ.com. And I would love to be a support to whoever is looking for resources, wants to have me come and work with their communities, is looking for support and affirmation for yourself in your own journey. You are not alone. You are absolutely loved and cherished. You belong. And thank you so very much for having me in this space today.
Thank you, Lex.